Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pastana. We're here today with special guest, Addison Crissone, who's here to share with us her new novel, The Yellow Badge. Can the story of one girl's bravery inspire young readers to find their own voice in challenging times? Well, today's guest is here to share with us just that. From an early age, Addison Crissone had dreamed of becoming a published author, crafting many stories, poems, and blog posts with the passion of telling others about Jesus Christ. When she isn't writing her own stories or researching historical accounts, you can find her reading in a hammock somewhere, working outdoors, or vacationing with her family at the beach. The Yellow Badge is her debut novel. So welcome to the show, Addison Crissone.
Thank you.
Oh my goodness, what an honor it is to have you here, Addison, and to talk about your debut book. I mean, my goodness, what an inspiration you are. Why did you choose to write about World War II and the Holocaust?
Well, so as you can imagine, I get that question all the time because people come up to me and see that I'm 17 and, they're kind of shocked when they hear that I wrote a book about something as dark and complex as World War II and the Holocaust. And they're just kind of surprised and they'd like to know why. But in truth, I didn't really choose it myself. I feel like over the course of, I think, about a year in preparation of writing it, God just really led me and orchestrated the events and the themes of the book into my life. And he led me eventually to research and fall in love with the story of the Holocaust. And I kind of just didn't really have a choice in the matter. It was just what I felt led to write.
Well, it definitely sounds like a passion that just came through for you. And my goodness, what an inspiration that is, being called and then feeling like, okay, I have to do this.
Yeah. Like, it wasn't really I wake up one morning and, decide, hey, I'm just going to write about the Holocaust. It was definitely something I feel like he intentionally wove in, months before I even started researching.
Well, there's a lot I want to dive into there, but before we get too far down the road, how did you come up with the character of Ruth DeVos?
So I think she's largely inspired by myself. I think a lot of authors, they need to know their protagonists as best as they can. Um, and you never know anyone as well as you know yourself. So I think she has a lot of the same likes and dislikes that I have. She's passionate, protective of her family and friends. She's fiercely loyal. Sometimes she's sarcastic, which I think I am a lot of those things, But one thing I wanted her to have a certain feisty nature that I don't necessarily see in myself. I wanted her to be bold, courageous, and unafraid to speak up for her faith, for her family, and her country, which is something I think not only speaks volumes for the background of the book, but then also speaks volumes to the readers. That's something we can all learn from as we're reading her story.
Well, she definitely does encompass some values that I think a lot of people either have or wish they could develop. And you mentioned about the research, and I'd like to touch on that for a little bit.
Okay.
What was the research like for this book?
So I started, I think, May of 2023, and it all began as an essay that I was supposed to write on the Nazi occupation of Belgium during World War II. And it kind of just evolved from an essay into a story because I've always been more of a storyteller than a fact by fact essay writer. So I just kind of fell in love with the research of, Belgium and, exactly what or how and when not the Nazi Germany invaded. And Ruth just kind of came through that research and then her story. But it took a ton of research for this, as you can imagine. And it wasn't even just I researched for several months and then started writing. I had to research as I was writing, to fact check myself, make sure everything was correct and lined up with historical accounts. But yeah, it was just a lot of internet surfing, checking to make sure that my sources were credible and trustworthy. But yeah, in all, I think I researched probably about a year in total for it.
Well, that's just remarkable spending that amount of time and doing that research and pulling that information as you're writing the book.
Mm-hmm.
When you were, I know this is probably a question you get all the time. When you were doing your research, was there anything that really surprised you?
Not really. I didn't really know. So I've always been a history buff, but in school, like I wasn't like World War II wasn't the primary topic for me. So I wasn't really expecting anything. I guess when I went into researching, so anything that I read, I was like, oh, okay, that's true. I'll write that down. Keep that in mind. So nothing came as a true shock to me, except for, just the evil that comes along with the Holocaust. A lot of people see it as a depressing topic, and Hitler, his atrocities to the Jewish people were very heart-wrenching. So that would have came as a surprise to me, but I don't think much else had.
So, what was your favorite scene that you were able to write in your book?
So I have a favorite chapter, and that's chapter 30. But a specific scene in that she's in Dawson Barracks, also known as Mechlin Transit Camp, and she's about to be loaded onto the 20th train to Auschwitz. Um, and I think this was just my favorite scene to write because it's where truly historical accounts met fiction. Where that fact meets fiction, and it just kind of works. Because the attack on the 20th convoy on April 19th, 1943, is totally true. I tried to weave as much as I could in this. So if you look it up, I mean, you're going to see a lot of parallels in the chapter 30. Um, but I just love it because I think that faith. This is really where her faith becomes kind of raw and relatable to the readers, and also just tangible in a way that we hadn't seen throughout the rest of the book. So I think it's just very powerful when it comes to faith for the reader, and I hope it touches the reader in that aspect.
So, what was the hardest part about writing this story?
Well, I think I touched on it a little bit, but the evilness of the Holocaust, the topic, it was very dark. I'm not going to say I was depressed while I was writing it, but it was a very heavy subject to deal with. But I felt entirely called by God to write it, so it was totally worth it. But it was just a very heavy topic to kind of keep having to surround myself in for the duration of writing. But yeah, I think just the weight of the Holocaust itself was the hardest thing to do for the story.
So, why was it important for you to include faith and hope in this story?
Well, mainly because the Holocaust is such a dark time in our history. And it was probably a time where hope seemed dire. Not a lot of people had it, especially if they were already in a transit camp or in Auschwitz. They had like a certain death sentence. So hope was a special theme to weave into it. But as for faith, I was raised in church. Me and my sisters were, and we were taught, from an early age to rely on our faith for everything that we do in life, to keep God first. So it was never really a question of whether or not to include faith in it. It was just what I had to do.
Well, there's definitely a lot of faith that was needed at that time in history. And so I can
Definitely.
understand incorporating that in hope because that was something people really hung on to.
That was all they had. You know, they didn't have anything else. Their families had been ripped away from them. They themselves knew that they were probably about to meet a certain death, so they only had faith. And if their faith was strong enough, then that was how they persisted and how they pulled through and survived.
I know your book really shares a lot about courage. What does courage mean to you?
So I think courage to me means doing what is asked of you without the fear of man or the fear of the consequence. You just do it. The key verse in the Yellow Badge is also my life verse, Matthew 10:28. Do not fear those who can kill the body but cannot kill the soul. So, in the book, the characters, they're made to do things and say things that may carry very heavy, often life threatening consequences, but they showcased courage in such a way that they weren't afraid to do what was asked of them. They just did it despite knowing, what not what the consequences could be, and knowing that they could utterly be killed or soon be killed for whatever it was that they were doing, whether it was hiding Jews in their homes or speaking up to Nazi German, anything like that. And I just think courage, it also applies to us today. And a lot of us would rather keep our mouth shut and not speak up for our faith when we know that God has asked us to speak about whatever it is. And in the book, they did that. They spoke up. They weren't silent. And a lot of times they probably should have been silent, but they weren't. And that's, I think, what courage is.
Did any part of this story make you emotional while you were writing it?
So the last chapter, is chapter 41, and it was the only point in the book that actually made me cry and break down. I can't say much as to why because I don't want to give any spoilers away to any readers out there. It's a very powerfully beautiful closing to the book that I think will surprise a lot of readers and hopefully make them cry like it did me, just because it is so powerful and it speaks volumes to the Christian faith and Christian life and how far that extends to, life afterward in heaven, and when our faith becomes sight.
Well, we definitely don't want to give any spoilers away. Are you planning a sequel or are you working on another book?
So I actually do have a sequel to The Yellow Badge. It's in the works. It was not my original plan to have a sequel. I wanted it to be a standalone novel. But after my family read it for the first time, they demanded that it should be continued. They said it could not end with chapter 41. So I hated the thought and I denied it for a very long time. Um, but I just kind of eventually, it wasn't a bad idea after all. And so after I think, let's see, 3 months, I had it written in 2 months, but 3 months after I finished the the Yellow Badge, it was done. So there is a sequel for it. And as far as other books, I am currently working on a project for the Civil War. And I have so many other ideas, it's kind of crazy. So I can't really pick just one, but the Civil War is going to be the next project.
If the Yellow Badge became a movie, who would you want to play Ruth?
So really love this question, but I don't really know. It's as an author, it's extremely hard for me to see my character as a modern day actress. I see her in my mind, but I don't see her in the face of a modern day actress. But I would probably want her, whoever it would be, to be of Jewish heritage. Just to pay homage to the Jews and the Jewish people in the Holocaust, and to pay homage to the story and stay true to the roots. As far as appearances go, I would like to kind of say I see her a little bit looking like Winona Ryder as Jo in the 1994 adaptation of Little Women. But that's probably as far as I could go because I've researched and I've looked at actresses today, and I just haven't really seen one that kind of fits the bill yet.
So, what advice would you give to other writers, young writers like yourself?
I would just say start writing. You're never gonna get anywhere if you don't write. If you just sit around forever saying, "Oh, I want to write a book one day," it's most likely never gonna happen. So it takes a lot of hard work and dedication to actually just start writing a book, let alone finishing it. But it's just so worth holding that finished copy in your hand for the first time. And so literally, just start writing. Plotting, yes, but literally just start writing. Sit down, put pen to paper, and get to work.
So many people have writer's block. What
Hmm.
would you suggest to them? Is there like music that you play when you write? Do you have a certain time of day? What works for you?
I like it to be quiet. I go to my room, whatever time of day it is. It may be morning, it may be evening. It really doesn't matter for me. But I sit down at the desk, shut the door, and I just start writing. And usually, what I found that helps is I set a timer, and I usually start from like 15 minutes to maybe 30 minutes. I don't do long ones, but I call it just these writing streaks, and I just sit down until the timer stops, and then I can, get up, go get something to drink, something, and then I come back and I do it again. Because that just helps keep me focused because I am bad. So think about something else and get distracted. But yeah, I don't really have a specific routine because I am still doing like college classes and stuff, so I have to weave that in every now and then.
So, Addison, where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community and learn more about your work?
So I am on Facebook and Instagram under Addison Crissone Author or A Crissone Author for Instagram. I also have a website. It's addisoncrissone.pubsitepro.com.
Well, Addison, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you for having me.
Make sure to visit Addison's website at addisoncrissone.pubsitepro.com to learn more about her work, be part of her community, and also where you can pick up copies of her book. The Yellow Badge is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and everywhere books are sold. And remember, support our indie bookstores. If you don't see it on the shelf, just ask for them to order it. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Mary Ann, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.